everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Dr. Monique Smith Gadson with Transforming Visions Counseling and Consulting Services. Thank you so much for tuning in on today. Today's segment is going to be about trauma. And I was inspired to discuss trauma due to the natural disaster that impacted my hometown of Lee County, Alabama on March the 3rd. Some of you may know that a severe weather system moved through the southeast on that particular Sunday, and Lee County was tremendously and adversely impacted by that particular weather event. 23 lives were lost. Some survivors lost not only entire families of relatives and neighbors, but they also lost every earthly possession, their homes, cars, clothing, everything that they owned. And it has just been overwhelming. It has been something hard to wrap my mind around. It's taken me a moment to even figure what is it that I could do to be of some assistance. And as I even prayed, and I said, Lord, I'm praying. I have donated where I know to donate financially. I still feel like there's so much more that needs to be done, or this burden that I need to do something more. And the Holy Spirit reminded me, what have I given you to do? And I knew right then that I was to come and share from information, from knowledge, from the gift of healing. I'm to share this with my community, my hometown, my fellow citizens of Lee County, Alabama. So today we're going to talk about trauma, and I'm just going to give, as I have kind of entitled this, tidbits, just a few nuggets about trauma for survivors and for supporters of those survivors, because trauma, the whole topic of trauma is so expansive, it's so complicated and so complex that it will take the rest of the year to really talk about it in the fullness of its nature. But for the purposes of what I'm sharing with you on today, I'm just going to give a few tidbits. I'm going to define what trauma is. I'm going to talk about some of the effects of trauma. I am going to talk about how we might respond to trauma. And I'm also going to talk about ways that we can effectively support those who have been victims of of a traumatic event. Okay, so I'm going to start off today by defining what trauma is. And trauma results from an event or series of events or series of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. Trauma also has adverse effects on an individual's functioning and their mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So when we're talking about trauma, we are talking about an event that overwhelms what would be our natural coping mechanisms. This is kind of outside of that scope. This is more than when we're talking about trauma. We are also talking about the fact that trauma alters a person's life and they don't live life the same. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it does mean that we must understand when most people experience traumatic events, they don't look at life the same. Okay, and that is okay. So 3 things real quickly that trauma can result in for some individuals. The first one being trauma can result in silence. The second one is isolation. And the third one is helplessness. So those are 3 results of trauma. Some people are silent, and it's okay when your brain is trying to wrap itself around what we have just experienced and trying to formulate and articulate words to express what is inexpressible and to speak what is unspeakable and to think what is unthinkable, sometimes people just don't have the words and therefore they are silent, while internally they are trying to make sense of everything that has taken place. So silence is a normal reaction to grief, to trauma. It's okay. We should not try to force people to talk during this time. We may need to take it as a cue, especially those of us who are trying to come alongside people who have experienced trauma, and we might need to be silent ourselves. We just need to come alongside them and just love them well and give them a moment in their silence. It is okay. Isolation. Even though you're coming around, a community is gathering around people, sometimes individuals will still feel isolated. They may feel no one understands what they are feeling or what they are experiencing, or them feeling like they may be going crazy or whatever it could be. Isolation is real. It is a real result of experiencing a traumatic event. And helplessness. Of course, we're all going to feel that way when things happen that are beyond our control. And when it is all said and done, there's this sense of helplessness that may descend upon us, even for those who survive such events. Helplessness. When you're in the middle of a traumatic event taking place, you feel helpless. And even if you survive that event, comments such as, well, at least you survived, sound like they may be helpful, but they're not really helpful, especially sooner rather than later. That is something that we really want people to kind of come to terms with themselves, because that tells us as therapists that they are integrating this experience, this event in their lives, but they feel helpless. And it is okay for them to have this sense of helplessness because they have just survived something that has been beyond their control, that has overwhelmed their coping mechanisms, and that has impacted them in various dimensions of their very being. So those are 3 results of trauma. Some of the feelings that are associated with trauma: there can be intense fear. Again, there can be this feeling of helplessness, and there's this loss of control and annihilation. Again, life will never be the same for someone who has experienced a traumatic event. And in this, for the citizens of Lee County, we're talking about a natural disaster. Life will never be the same, and that is okay. One of the things that we have to understand is that we're in this season of severe weather outbreaks. You know, in the spring, we tend to experience more severe weather typically than most other seasons. And when people hear the threats, or when they hear how weather may be projected, it might cause what may appear to someone else as an exaggerated response. But we have to understand, if you have lived through surviving a tornadic event such as the one that the residents of Lee County experienced, we can understand that there is going to be this hypervigilance. There is going to be a hyper response that takes place, a hyper arousal that takes place within them, because of the fact that that is one of the residual effects of experiencing a traumatic event. We have to understand that as people are trying to recover, the very threat, the very thought of there being another weather outbreak is going to sometimes get in the way of people recovering. But we have to deal with that, in time. But in the moment, maybe if they're watching the weather and it's predicted that there is going to be severe weather, or the potential of severe weather, and if the person feels as though that they are beginning to panic, what we as supporters can do is help them to understand, you're thinking of the memory right now. We try to ground a person in the present moment. And we say to them, you're thinking about the memory. Right now, you are safe. Right now, you are safe. There is no threat of severe weather right now. That's projected. We will do what we can do to prepare for that, but for right now, we are safe. And sometimes trying to help ground a person can help calm down that hyper arousal, that anxiety that is naturally going to increase when they feel the threat of the same type of event that they have experienced coming again. Okay, so we definitely want to make sure that we give room for people to be able to have these feelings of isolation, feelings of helplessness, and feelings of silence. One of the things I thought about, I kept thinking that this sounded like a modern day Joe event where, as people were preparing and hearing that severe weather was coming, I know I planned to travel to Lee County myself that same day to visit my mom and my brother, but knew that the weather was predicted and thought it was best for me to stay back home and not travel there. So you get the message that severe weather is coming, and then severe weather is here, and now you are living through a storm, a devastating storm. You realize that you have survived it. You are climbing or being helped out of the rubble of what used to be your home. You look around and your mind immediately starts thinking, well, where is my aunt, my uncle, my mother, my father, my daughter, my son, my neighbor, my cousin? All of these people, you're walking around, you're looking if you're able to, or people are coming and saying, hey, where is, grandma or grandfather? Unfortunately, people found some of their relatives and realized that they did not survive the storm. Then they may realize that some are missing. They may find out that some have been transported to the hospital, but they're not sure of their status. They don't know if they're dead or still alive. Then they may get word that someone down the street, the whomever family, all of them perished. And it's one onslaught after the other. Before you can take a deep breath and understand what has happened, there is another incident and another incident and another incident and more information, and all of these things just kind of come together and they just compound on top of one another. And Job, the Bible tells us that he tore his clothes, shaved his head, he fell to the ground, he worshiped, but these were all expressions of his anguish. He was overwhelmed. And we know with Job, he also then was inflicted with disease, and he got to the place where he just didn't have anything to say. And his friends came alongside him, and for 7 days and nights they didn't say anything because they noticed that their friend suffered. So sometimes when we realize that our loved ones and our friends and people that we're coming alongside to help are suffering, sometimes the best thing that we can do is to just be silent. We can be silent. We can say, here's food to eat, or here are clothes to put on. Here is shelter for you to stay. Here are monies for you to buy some of the necessities that you need. But the results that I mentioned beforehand, the silence, the isolation, the helplessness, we don't have to tell someone, you don't have to feel alone. You don't have to tell someone you need to say something. You just do what you can do. Show them that they are not alone. Show them that it's okay for them to be silent. Go about meeting the practical needs that you know they have, and respecting what it is that a person is experiencing during this time. If, as a supporter, we cannot literally descend into the valley of death, in this instance, it wasn't even the shadow of death, it was actual death. If we cannot descend into the valley of death with people who have experienced such traumatic events, then we don't need to be supporters who come alongside a person. Maybe we, do something away from actually interacting with people who have experienced trauma, because it's not about making us feel good. It's about just coming alongside them when they may be feeling the worst that they have ever felt in their lives. This is trauma, and this is trauma work, and this is what trauma survivors experience, and this is what trauma supporters want to recognize and they want to keep in mind as they figure, how is it that I can come alongside survivors and victims and effectively minister to them. We may have to just be silent, and we especially have to be patient. People who experience traumatic events may keep repeating the events over and over again, or talking about it in different ways, and it's not so much that they are looking for any sympathy. It's not even that they're trying to gain attention. They are literally trying to make sense of what has happened in their lives. And this is part of that process of having to integrate traumatic events into our very existence. And instead of cutting people off or saying, don't talk about that, or you can't keep living there, we don't need to do that. That hinders their recovery. It hinders their process of healing from a traumatic event. So we have to be patient. There are going to be times that we're going to have to be silent, and we're just going to have to be gentle and come alongside them and just love them well and meet those practical needs. And in time, when there is some sense of some type of stability, which really still won't feel like stability for some people, then we can kind of move up that hierarchy of needs. But in that moment, people don't need a sermon. People may not even need our verbal, out loud prayers. They need us to come alongside them. They need us to love them and support them well and effectively. They need us to not do no harm, no more harm than has already been afflicted upon them by result of natural disasters or other traumatic events. This is the nature of trauma. It's a hard work. It's a difficult work, but it is a work that I feel like the Lord has called us to do, to come alongside others and love them well. The Bible teaches us that we rejoice when people rejoice, but we also weep when they weep. And our hearts have wept for the citizens and for family members and for friends and fellow citizens. Our hearts weep as their hearts weep. But I also offer what I have. Silver and gold, I have none. If I had it, I would do as some good Samaritans did and pay for all of these expenses that I know people are going to have for days and months, weeks and years to come. But silver and gold have I none, but such as I have given to thee and to thee. And my hope and my prayer is that some of what I have shared today, it can be broken, it can be breathed upon, it can be blessed, and it can feed the multitude, and not necessarily in number, but if in number, that's great too, but also the multitude of issues that have resulted as the impact of these traumatic events have descended upon individuals, and their realities are slowly coming to light. It's my hope and my prayer that what I have shared with you on today will assist you on your road to recovery as you process your healing, and as those who have been called to come alongside those survivors to help you to effectively minister to those who have survived these traumatic events. So, I am Dr. Monique Smith Gadson, Transforming Visions. You can follow me on Instagram or Facebook, and you can subscribe here on YouTube. My prayers are with you, and until the next time, God bless.